Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 105. Panic at the USJ. Izuku felt a sharp pain in his chest as he was unceremoniously deposited on the outskirts of the plaza. He ignored it in favor of searching desperately for Eraser. He found him lying on the ground a couple dozen meters away, and he tried to will himself to his feet again. But that wasn't going to happen, so he gave up quickly and started crawling as best as he could. Every movement sent shocks of pain through his body, but he just kept going. He couldn't stop. He needed to make sure Eraser was okay. He had to be okay. He could hear the fight continuing in the plaza, but he had a single-minded focus. That's all he could do right now. Making his way to Eraser's side, he hit him in the chest, as it was the only place within his reach that wasn't wounded. Relief washed over him as Eraser grunted and stirred. He cried out in pain, but he needed to stay awake. Izuku didn't want to know how bad of a concussion he was sporting, but it had to be pretty severe. He couldn't let him sleep if he could help it. Eraser! Eraser! Stay with me! You're concussed. You can't sleep right now. Come on! Eraser groaned and squinted against the light before closing his eyes again. Nope! No napping! Nap's gonna earn you brain damage. Get up! Izuku said, hitting him in the chest again. He groaned again and seemingly went to bat away Izuku's hand, but given his arms were absolutely shattered, it didn't go as planned, and he let out another pained yell. Izuku immediately slapped his good hand over his mouth to silence him. They didn't need to attract attention right now. Don't move your arms, they're screwed up, he chastised, forgetting himself for a moment. Thanks, I've figured that out on my own, he quipped back, slurring his words heavily. Thanks, Ivy. I figured that out on my own. Izuku's stomach dropped. Did he just call him Ivy? What? He stuttered out in response. Eraser squinted up at him again and looked very confused before speaking. Sorry, thought you were someone else. Sorry, thought you were someone else. Izuku did his best to hide his sigh of relief, but Eraser was too busy looking around trying to figure out what the hell was going on anyway. He must have remembered because his confusion quickly melted away into fear, and he went to push himself up and let out a strangled moan again. Izuku was well versed in Eraser's various micro-expressions. He could read them as easy as breathing, but he had never seen fear like that on his face. He would give just about anything to never see it again. All Might is here, Aizawa-sensei. It's going to be all right. Izuku did his best to soothe. Stay down. You've done enough. Eraser squeezed his eyes shut at that. It looked more like he was trying to ground himself rather than he was falling asleep, so Izuku let him. The way he strained his face made the blood leaking from a cut on his right cheek start flowing into his eye, and Izuku did his best to mop it up with his shirt sleeve without hurting him further. Heedless of any blood in his eyes, he snapped them open as both of them turned their attention to the sound of footsteps approaching. They sounded like they were trying to be sneaky, but they weren't doing a stellar job. Freaking fantastic. They had 3 legs, 1 arm between them. This was going to be a shit show. Hitoshi had been frozen with fear, watching the horror show play out in front of him. He could do nothing but watch as Aizawa-sensei was crushed beneath that horrible creature, and he couldn't stop Midoriya from charging in. He watched Midoriya throw a knife into the thing's brain without hesitation and taunt the maniac in charge of this whole mission. He watched Midoriya throw himself back onto the monster's shoulders and plunge his knife into its brain over and over as unnaturally dark blood splattered all over him. He watched as Midoriya was flung across the plaza into the fountain, and he watched as he kept fighting it until it finally caught him and crushed his leg like it was nothing. He just watched. Kami, he was such a coward. He couldn't have forced himself to snap out of it until All Might burst through the doors and whisked Aizawa-sensei and Midoriya away. He felt a little bit better about his reaction when he had to shake Sue out of her own frozen horror as she watched All Might meet the Nomu blow for blow. "We need to get out of here," he whispered once he got her to tear her eyes away from the train wreck in front of them. She blinked a few times, trying to shake herself out of it, before wordlessly pushing Hitoshi back toward the entrance and away from the plaza. They crept along the outer border, doing their best to stay out of sight, until they saw Aizawa-sensei laying on the ground, screaming out in pain as Midoriya covered his mouth. Oh, thank Kami. They were alive. Both of them changed course immediately and started for their teacher and classmate. They looked ready to pounce until they recognized them, and Hitoshi could see relief settle onto their shoulders. Their reactions were eerily identical, but Hitoshi didn't have time to dwell on that because Midoriya started barking out orders. Shinso, use his capture weapon to staunch the bleeding on his elbow. Asui, help him sit up, he instructed as he laid down on his stomach, half propped up on one arm that still appeared to be functional. He was damn near just as mangled as Aizawa-sensei. Hitoshi didn't have the presence of mind to argue about that right now, though. He did what he was told. "Doria, what are your injuries?" Aizawa slurred through gritted teeth as Shinso wrapped his elbow. "Midoriya, what are your injuries?" "Use the rest of the length to make slings. Keep his arms at a 90-degree angle against his body," Midoriya ordered, ignoring Aizawa entirely. His arms are a bit out of shape, Garo," Sue said, looking down at the mangled limbs. He looked a little more green than usual. "Shinso, help me up. I can do it." "Doria! Injuries!" Aizawa tried again. "Midoriya! Injuries!" Again, Midoriya ignored him, and again, Hitoshi blindly followed instructions, helping Midoriya up to sit facing Aizawa. The gauntlet on his right arm was missing, and the sleeve was torn to bits. The exposed flesh was bruised and discolored. It looked swollen, and he wasn't moving it. It was probably broken too, just not as horrifically as his leg. He used his left hand and shoved part of Aizawa's scarf into his mouth and checked their surroundings before speaking. "This is gonna hurt. Don't scream." Aizawa tried to argue, but Midoriya swiftly arranged his arms into place, and Aizawa was forced to shut up. He bit down on the material in his mouth, and despite his best efforts, he let out a quiet, muffled shout. He started to go limp, but Sue caught him before he fell again, and Midoriya started hitting his leg to get his attention back. He was breathing heavily and shot Midoriya a glare before spitting out the handful of capture scarf. "Help him to his feet," Midoriya instructed, ignoring the glare entirely. "Midoriya, what are your injuries?" Aizawa demanded for a third time, pain and anger seeming to have made his words clearer. "Broken leg, arm, and fingers, probably several broken ribs. Now get up," Midoriya snipped back. Whatever weird-ass argument that was brewing between the two of them cut off when a deafening screech called all of their attention back to the center of the facility. All Might had smoke rising from him as he ripped Midoriya's knife out of the Nomu's brain and plunged it back in again and again, just like Midoriya had done earlier. The beast screamed in agony as the blade cut through its gray matter and dark blood splattered out in all directions. The four of them watched with mute horror as the creature stopped screaming and fell limp onto the floor at All Might's feet. The psycho ringleader let out an enraged screech at that and charged toward All Might. All Might was standing his ground, but Midoriya started screaming and tried to get up and run into the fray again. Before any of them had the mind to stop him, shots started ringing out from the entrance, and the psycho went down, getting enveloped in purple mist and disappearing before anyone could reach him. Steam erupted from All Might, and a wall sprung up from the floor before Hitoshi could see what was going on. The rest of the teachers were here. Oh, thank Kami. Hitoshi looked back to the entrance and saw President Mike barreling toward them faster than he would have thought them capable of. When Hisashi heard the alarms go off and the announcement for all teachers to report to the USJ, he knew it was going to be bad. He felt his heart plummet to his feet. He knew Shota. He knew he would die before he let his kids get hurt. He had one foot firmly planted in the denial stage of grief and the other in bargaining before he even made it to the door. He saw the carnage inside and watched as his coworkers reported to the students' sides until his eyes settled on Shota and the trio of kids surrounding him. Oh, thank Kami, he muttered to himself as he ran for them. Shota was hurt. He was hurt badly and covered in blood, but he was alive, and Hisashi was so relieved he could almost cry. As he ran over, he saw that Midoriya was also on the ground. His leg was absolutely mangled, and he looked to be having a coughing fit. Asui was holding Shota up, and Shinso appeared to be holding Midoriya back. As they made their way to the group, they spared a glance towards Shota, just enough for him to communicate that he would be all right before he turned his attention to Midoriya. The kid was hysterical. He was seemingly trying to get up and run into the plaza, but he didn't have much fight left in him, so Shinso wasn't having trouble holding him back. Midoriya, kiddo, come on, sit back. It's over. It's okay. They did their best to soothe him, but he wouldn't hear it. It's dead? It regenerates. Is it actually dead? He's alone. He cut himself off with a coughing fit. His breaths were wheezing and labored. Midoriya, lay back. Shota slurred out. Oh, that wasn't good. His eyes were drifting in and out of focus. He definitely had a concussion, a severe one by the looks of it. Shinso pulled Midoriya back as he weakly fought against him with only his left arm. His right arm was broken too, wasn't it? Shit's got a punctured lung. Broken ribs. Zashi, get a stretcher. Don't move him. Shota instructed. Shit, he's got a punctured lung, broken ribs. Zashi, get a stretcher. Don't move him. Oh, damn it. They could see blood dribbling out from the corner of his mouth. That was not good. That was very much not good. We need a stretcher ASAP! Hisashi called back up toward the entrance. He could hear sirens. The paramedics had to be close. Can you walk, Eraser? Theoretically. Probably not straight. Probably. His eyes were starting to lose focus again. He was doing his best to blink away the fog, but it didn't seem to be working. No, I'm going to pass out. Theoretically. Probably not straight. Probably not. No, I'm going to pass out. His adrenaline was fading. Asui, try to keep him awake, he instructed before turning around. 2 stretchers! Midoriya's breathing was getting more and more labored, and he wasn't settling down. In fact, he was getting worse as he watched Shota's head slump back against Asui's shoulder. Racer, no, get up! He wheezed out as he frantically hit his leg, trying to rouse him. Midoriya, stop. Don't move. Moving is only going to make it worse. The paramedics will be here any second. He's going to be fine. Hisashi tried to calm him while doing his best to insert himself between the two. While Midoriya was too distracted with trying to see Shota or the central plaza from around Hisashi's body blocking him, he made pointed eye contact with Shinso and glanced down at Midoriya. He had to do it a few times before it got through Shinso's panic-addled brain, but eventually he got the message. Midoriya, what's wrong in the plaza? Shinso asked. Midoriya's eyes went foggy before he even got the next word out. Calm down and stop moving, Shinso ordered numbly. Thank you, Shinso. Keep him still as long as you can, they said as they turned their attention to Shota. Asui, I've got him. He relieved the girl of Shota's weight and held him to his chest, doing his best to wake him up, but he seemed completely out of it. He was breathing. They had to remind himself. that he was breathing. Hitoshi was so out of his depth. Midoriya was in his arms, coughing up blood and struggling with every breath. He was so scared he could hardly think beyond the fear. The one thing ringing through his mind was that Midoriya was going to die. He was going to die in Hitoshi's arms. He was going to die right in front of him, just like his father had, and there was not a damn thing he could do about it. It felt like hours had passed by when the paramedics finally whisked him away. Hitoshi was ushered outside, and he obeyed without question. All he could do was sit there, shell-shocked, until he felt his control over Midoriya snap away as the ambulance rushed off into the distance. He was sitting next to Sue, and despite the warm spring air that surrounded him, he felt frigid. He was trembling, and eventually someone came over and settled a blanket over his shoulders. It stilled his shaking for a while, but then he just started to become overly aware that he was sitting in wet clothes. The baggy material clung to his frame, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. But he couldn't do much about it. Yamada Sensei kept checking in on them, but it all just felt like static. What if Midoriya didn't make it? What if he died and he never got the chance to forgive him? Why did he feel himself wanting to forgive him, even though he still refused to explain himself? Was that just the guilt that he couldn't do anything to save him talking? Hitoshi wasn't sure. He wasn't sure about anything. He wasn't sure how to feel, and he wasn't sure what to do. He wasn't sure what he even wanted. End of chapter.